like a good place to get started. All right. So, welcome everybody. I hope everybody is doing well. Not a whole lot to report. I got a little bit in the vaccine world, so we'll talk about that. But we are continuing to see a decrease. In fact, now the estimate is that there are at least 28 states that are seeing a significant decline in their case rate. So that is good. Fortunately, we're not really seeing anywhere in the country that's seeing a huge spike in mortality. So, one of the discussions, even though we were seeing this spike in case rate and we were kind of waiting with bated breath to see the huge spike in mortality, we did see an increase, no doubt about it. I'm not trying to belittle it, but it certainly was not as vigorous as what it has been previously, which is good. I mean, it definitely suggests that our therapeutics are beginning to have the desired effect, and that, obviously we're still a little bit fearful of what the variants could bring in the weeks ahead, but we're definitely heading in the right direction. The other thing, to the point of therapeutics, that I would point out, we had talked before about the antibody cocktail for those with mild to moderate disease who have been recently diagnosed but not admitted. So this is the Regeneron drug that got touted when President Trump got it. So there is now a plan afoot to have at least a limited degree of administration of Regeneron available. We'll probably know more by early next week. So I know a lot of folks have reached out and asked. I still don't think it's going to be in wide enough availability that anybody who gets diagnosed would have access. Obviously, it's going to create the question of, okay, what would be the potential inclusion criteria for who would be a candidate to be referred. So there's a lot to work out on that in the coming days, but it does seem like we're going to have access to that in our community, which previously the phrase that continues to get used is the juice wasn't worth the squeeze, in that, you had to catch people ideally within 4 days of diagnosis. They could only have mild to moderate disease, and you administered it was not effective after they were hospitalized or in severe cases of disease. So theoretically, everybody that got COVID would potentially want Regeneron. So I still think, in the grand scheme of things, compared to steroids and remdesivir, it probably is still a mild player. And especially now that we're getting some data for colchicine, there's been another push for ivermectin, even though there's a lot of disagreement about the value of that from the data we've seen to date. So it will be another tool, but will not be the end all be all. And it's certainly very costly and not widely available such that everybody would have access to it. But yet another thing that we should have available to us locally. Otherwise, I don't think there's a whole lot else to say about the current State of the Union. We are seeing a decrease in our daily mortalities, which is great. We are seeing a decrease in our new case rate pretty much across the region, which is also good. We still, to my knowledge, have not isolated any of the 4 major variants of the virus in the Western New York region. And overall, across the country, we're still seeing a relative paucity of incidents of those variants popping up here and there. So that's good as well. Testing, the new platform is up and running. It seems to be functioning very well, to the point that, everything we talked before about testing availability being readily available as we need it come February now seems to be the case. We are still far underpacing our ordering of testing compared to where we were, say, before Thanksgiving, around Thanksgiving in 2020. So that should not be an issue for anybody. And that modality, I don't think it quite allows us to double our capacity, but it was pretty close. So, whereas before, I think we had the capacity to go up to 3,500 tests a day. We're talking about probably an additional 2,000 plus tests a day that can be run with those high capacity platforms. So we should be in pretty good shape from that standpoint as well. Now on to the big discussion, the vaccine. There has been some incremental development, and I kind of want to give a State of the Union where we stand right now. So as of the end of the day yesterday, across the US, there were 33.7 million doses given thus far. So obviously we're trying to head towards that 100 million doses or potentially 150 million doses in the first 100 days. So we're on par with that potentially being available. Our 7-day average is up slightly. It was down in the last 24 hours, but certainly up from where it was a week ago. We were at about 860,000 doses a day. We're now averaging about 1.32 million doses per day. So you can see, even a week or so makes a big difference. This week we received or anticipating a 16% increase in the amount of vaccine that comes into the Finger Lakes region. That should all be delivered today or tomorrow. The new estimate is that we should see a 20 to 30% increase in vaccine coming into the region for the next 3 weeks. So that should be a big increase comparatively, which will actually put us ahead of the amount of vaccine we were receiving in the first couple of weeks of the vaccination effort, which is good. The other kind of accessory information is that there's about 30,000 doses, I believe was the number, that's going to go directly from the federal government directly to community pharmacies. So they will be bypassing the state altogether. So the state will still get all those increase in doses that we're talking about, but there'll be yet another influx of vaccine that's coming directly to pharmacies, and the pharmacies are directly responsible for administering vaccine to the 65 and older category. So they're trying to accelerate getting through that 65 and older. Remember, we talked before, the estimate locally is that we would be at about a 14-week time frame. With this new acceleration of vaccine, the estimate is that we can probably get it to maybe as low as 10 weeks or less, and maybe even better than that, knowing that not everybody's going to want the vaccine. As far as population, so we have some data estimates from New York City. I've not seen it for all of New York State, but in New York City, where 48% of the population is Caucasian, I believe it was something like 12% as Asian, 24% African American, 28% Hispanic, if I remember exactly. The Caucasian population, 33% of the population. So it was disproportionate that 48% of those who were candidates had received the vaccine. Whereas if you look in the African American and Latino populations, it was only about half of that population. So it's disproportionate number of people who are getting vaccinated that are Caucasian, and actually Asians were getting vaccinated. So Caucasians represented 48% of everyone who had been vaccinated. Asians represented 12%. Latinos and African Americans represented 11% each, even though they represented about twice or more of that proportion of the population. So we are still seeing ethnic disproportionality to the vaccination. Some of that is because of willingness. Some of that has been access. And there is some ongoing concern about right now, the only way you've been able to get vaccine up until this point is if you have internet access. Either you can schedule an appointment online or put yourself on a list somehow. That probably is going to change as we get into the community-based pharmacies. And my understanding is the vaccine coming from the federal government is being preferentially tiered to pharmacies in rural and inner city locations to try to improve access to those communities. So a lot in there. We still got a lot to work on. Again, that data of disproportionality is coming from New York City. I can't say that applies to Western New York necessarily. The early data that I had seen was that it was a bit more proportionate, but obviously more to come on that, and we'll should know more probably in the next couple of days as the CTSI group has been compiling some data that they're going to be sharing. So that's that. 6.36 million people in the United States have completed both doses of the vaccine. So we've got 33.7 million total doses given. Only about a fifth of those are totally complete. So we're still got a long ways to go, but we're administering 1.3 million doses a day. We're starting to catch up a little bit, but we got to theoretically vaccinate 350 million people. We got a lot of work to do because this can't take a year. So a lot more to come there. For New York State, 91% of the distributed doses have been administered. We are one of the leaders nationally as far as utilization of the vaccine, which is great. There was a bit more second dose that had not been administered yet. We're running into issues either with people who have contracted COVID after their first dose, some people have refused their second dose. People are needing to reschedule second doses. So there's been a bit more difficulty, if you will, getting those second doses administered. It does appear that the length of time that you can wait after your scheduled second dose is probably no more than that 30 to 40 days. So there is a finite window before you would theoretically have to restart the sequence. But I do think that people who would theoretically have to restart the sequence would go down to the bottom of the list. So if you outright refuse, if you get 40 days and you can't make it to a vaccination site, then probably your restart will be not highly preferentially treated. So just know that if there's folks in your practices or whatnot that are on the fence about second doses, hopefully that doesn't apply to very many. The other big shift, although probably not directly applicable, at least in one phase, to Western New York, but there had been some ongoing conflict discussion around restaurant workers, food delivery workers, and taxi drivers that had not been included in the preferential vaccine access thus far. So the Cuomo administration kind of did a 180 in the last 24 hours. They have now included those folks into the cleared to receive vaccine now. So again, that's restaurant workers, food delivery, and taxi drivers that have been elevated into that 1B category. I believe it's 1B. So like I said, I don't think we have a ton of taxi drivers in Western New York, but it obviously has a little bit more importance down in New York City. The next thing is AstraZeneca. So we got a bit more information about the AstraZeneca vaccine out of the UK. So remember, the UK had been one of the first to approve the AstraZeneca vaccine. I was not aware, but they've been tracking, they've been doing weekly testing of folks who got the AstraZeneca vaccine in the UK, or at least a subset of them. What they found is, of those who got the vaccine, there was a 68% decrease in the spread of the virus. So those who had been exposed, who got tested, were 68% less likely to have contracted or spread the virus. So that's very good. They think that, especially as we start talking about the variants, that the vaccine may help to slow the spread, even for those who have just gotten one dose of the vaccine. The other efficacy data that we've seen so far is that after the second dose of AstraZeneca, the efficacy as far as achieving immune response was about 72%. So that's 72% who avoided severe disease hospitalization. We had seen in one of the arms of the study that it was 91%. That was, initially we said that it was the group that got full dose and then 30 days later got the second full dose, had a 66 or 62%, I believe it was 66, 62% efficacy. But the group that got a half dose and then 30 days later had a 91% efficacy. Come to find out, the group that had the 91% efficacy was actually the group that got the second dose 120 days later. So initially it was, there's this immunoconditioning of getting a half dose and then waiting to get a full dose. It seems that the science is now shifting a little bit, and they think that there may be some magic to this separating the second dose by 120 days. So much so that there's now a push, predominantly from the European Union, to try to convince the United States to extend between the first and second dose of Pfizer and Moderna. There's been a lot of resistance in the US to doing that because that wasn't the cadence that was established in the trials of Pfizer and Moderna. Nevertheless, there's been a big discussion within the EU about delaying second doses of all two-dose vaccines by 120 days rather than by 30 days. And that may ultimately be more effective by spreading that second exposure to the second vaccine. Don't know where that's going to go. Everything that has come out from the CDC, from the vaccine task force, there has been no inkling that they are going to change that unless there's hard and fast data to suggest that there's value. Obviously, spreading the 2 doses 3 months apart would probably accelerate first dose administration because it would allow for more production time. There again has been more conversation about using the Defense Production Act to produce vaccine. Again, it seems like that conversation kind of rears its head, and then someone from the science community says you can't just get the patent and start making vaccine. So I don't even know if that's a realistic thing, but there, in the last 24 hours, that seems to again be a popular discussion that's coming around. So we'll see where that goes. Again, I've been trying to verify this. I was hoping to be able to put it together today. If you follow on social media, there is I think his name is Jinsu Shah. He is, what's that, the University of Chicago, and has been involved in a lot of the COVID data. I just can't find that it's actually attributed to him and not just some social media thing. So he has done a breakdown of looking at all 4 of the major vaccines, Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, and looking at the number of people admitted to the hospital with severe disease after first and second dose. And what the graphic shows, which is really impressive, is that no one got admitted to the hospital with severe disease, severe COVID, after first or second dose of the vaccine. So essentially, once you get it, you might get COVID, but you won't get hospitalized, intubated, and face that risk of mortality. That alone would be a huge, huge thing. So I'm going to try to see if I can get my hands on the original data to just verify that. And if so, I'll just reproduce the graphic with the citation, because that was, oh, there you go. Joan Flender to the rescue. I'm guessing that that says myths of vaccine manufacturing. Maybe you're answering my prior question. So I was going to say, if you have something that shows all the links to that, or if anybody has seen this graphic, it was really, really impressive. And if there was anything that I would think that would convince a patient population to get vaccinated, forget all is it 72%, is it 91%, is it 95%? Because nobody really understands what the hell that means. But if you can say, look, if you get this vaccine, you're not going to get severe COVID and die. Like, that's a pretty powerful how to make more vaccine. Okay, thanks, Jim. But if we can say, if you get a first or second dose of the vaccine, you won't wind up hospitalized, you won't wind up on a ventilator, you won't wind up dying of COVID. Doesn't matter which vaccine you get. That would be the thing that would resonate with patients. So I'm going to try to get that. I'll share it with you as soon as I'm able to prove or disprove the social media thing that's floating around. So if you've seen that, I really hope that's true. And I hope to be able to prove that within the next 24 hours or so. I just got to get my hands on all the original data. That's all I really have to say about that. I think there has been a lot of discussion. Obviously, the vaccine manufacturers are doing a lot of behind the scenes additional data collection. I think there's a wish, want, desire on the vaccine manufacturers to potentially go to this 120-day dosing increment for the 2 doses of the vaccine. But we'll see where that goes. We don't have anything in that in the US at this point. The final thing I would say about vaccine, there has been more rumbling that Johnson & Johnson may be gearing up its EUA application to the FDA, and that may be as soon as sometime within this next week, within the next 7 days. And if so, potentially we could see Johnson & Johnson hitting the market within the next 14 days. There's been a bit of back and forth about exactly how much they have available. The promise was 100 million. Sounds like they may have about 30 million ready to go in hand right now, with a total of 100 million within 30 days. That's additional doses of the vaccine, but that certainly could be substantial. AstraZeneca, on the back of this discussion from the EU, announced that they have a promise to the US of 300 million doses that have been pre-purchased by the United States. And basically the discussion was they would be ready to deliver those 300 million doses if and when the United States approves, or the FDA approves, their EUA. So we'll see where that goes. A lot of this data, is changing day to day now, it seems. So that could light a fire of getting people to the EUA faster. If we're talking 400 million doses of Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca that could be coming to market in the next 30 days, that will accelerate immunization of the entire population at a significant pace. So more to come on that. That's really all I have on this. The only other thing I wanted to bring up, and I really haven't even had a chance to talk to Renee or LJ about this, since the world is calming down and the fires seem to be going down, should we go back to a once a week cadence? And if so, should we do Mondays or Wednesdays? I can make an argument for both. Wednesdays is kind of midweek, so it allows us to gather some of the data that's happened in the beginning of the week. Mondays are Mondays. I don't have a better reason why that's a good day. Monday seems to be good for those in the chat who are chiming in very quickly. So if Mondays are the chosen day, that's great. If anybody has a strong feeling against that, I'm willing to entertain it. But if not, then we'll plan on going to once a week again, starting on Mondays. And then if the variants become misbehaviors, if we hear that vaccine is going to be coming to our practices, or if we see any significant shift, we'll let you know. Weekend numbers are not great. That's true. Lots of news from Cuomo on Monday too. So that's a good point, Nadine. You're right. The weekend numbers are not always beautiful, although we'd be possibly talking about a week's worth of data at that point since our last visit. So right now, I'll say Monday, but like I said, I can be compelled one way or the other if people feel strongly or have big objections because of workflow or other things that are going on in the world, Mondays or Wednesdays. So we'll make sure we put out an announcement in our email blast that goes out. I think that's all I have. So LJ, anything from you?
Thanks, Chad. The only thing I just wanted to highlight one more time, and won't spend any significant time on it, but we spoke about this on the last call. The return to sports, return to play guidance has changed. The primary care provider's role is still the same, still evaluating kids age 5 and up after they're released from isolation with COVID-19 infection. The guidance, the assessment questions are the same. We've highlighted a frequently asked questions document, and all of this went out together in a broad email blast that all of you should have received. If somebody did not get that email, feel free to reach out to Renee or myself. We'll make sure you get that. But on the frequently asked questions, I just wanted to highlight that in the symptom category, high-risk symptoms do not include persistent loss of taste or smell, or persistent respiratory symptoms. Those are expected to continue post-COVID for a period of time. They do not constitute the high-risk symptoms that persistent fever or prolonged fever, profound fatigue, myalgias would constitute. And then the other thing is the big change is in terms of a graduated return to play or return to PE. That no longer is applicable. The graduated return to play is only applicable to 12-year-olds and up who are engaged in competitive sports or intense physical activities. So it makes us in a little better position to play together and work together with our school partners. It's an easier thing to ask of them for coaches and athletic directors to do that graduated return to play. As you're assessing patients, keep in mind that many of them, by the time they get to you, may already have gone a little ways down their return to play route. It's very reasonable to identify on the release form where they are. Maybe they're already at stage 3, maybe they're at stage 2, maybe they are still at stage 1. You can circle that on the form. You can use your clinical judgment there. Our goal is not to keep kids out for too long, just to make sure that somebody is monitoring their return to physical activity if they're older and they're doing that kind of activity. I think that's it for me on that one. I see Robin had put a question in the chat about wondering if there's any new info related to the various COVID variants and impact on children. We don't have really any information on that yet, Robin. Kids represent such a small percentage of the severe illness with COVID, and hospitalization is, really minuscule, just minor. You can count the number of children sort of who've been hospitalized, and quite honestly, the the things that we're watching for now, we have been seeing here locally, as you all know, have been a few more, again, a few, not a ton, but a few more of the MIS-C, the MIS-C cases. But that's really it. So more to come, I think, as we see more infection with the variants. How many kids admitted so far at GCH with MIS-C? We had the pediatric infectious disease expert on last week, who identified that there had been 3 cases in this time since the big surge around the holidays that were admitted. And prior to that, there had been 1 or maybe 2 in the entire pandemic. She pointed out that it's not that there's something different about the variants or anything else right now. It's just that when you see those big surges, 6 to 8 weeks or so later is when you are more likely to see cases. And if you look, that's exactly the pattern where we saw cases for this. So we're just asking our primary care providers to be, aware of that when you're seeing these kids. For the cardiac evaluation, it's good to just remind families that if their child develops the symptoms that would be suggestive of that, to keep an eye out, and if they're developing symptoms, to come back to contact you for evaluation. And then there's another question from Mendon Peds. Patients sent to cardiology to be cleared, and they told them to come back to primary care for clearance. That is not an expectation, and I think we just shut that down today, maybe actually before the call. Peds cardiology, I just worked with George Porter, and they've now implemented a really nice return to play document that essentially is going to mirror exactly what the PCPs are doing. They are allowed to release to full return to play. If there's something more complicated with a patient, they're going to be doing follow-up first. So they know that they've got their return to play is the one that the schools can accept, and it will look very much like what you guys are doing. So I think we have just eliminated that variation. If it continues to happen, please let me know. That's it for me.
Perfecto. Renee, anything fun or exciting?
Just want to remind folks that the PPE survey went out earlier today, and we will have a PPE distribution next Wednesday at 9 a.m., 9 to 10:30.
Perfect. All right. So far the chat room preference to me seems to be people like Wednesdays for the call. There's a lot of people who don't necessarily love Wednesday, but they hate Monday. So that seems to be another vote in favor of Wednesday. Unless something changes dramatically, we'll look towards Wednesday, but perfect, there you go. We'll share in our email blast today. And other than that, I think we will finish early unless people have questions. I think we've run the chat room. Now somebody's trying to be irritating and voting for Tuesday, so that person will pay the price later. All right, hearing nothing, we'll call it a day. Thanks, everybody. Hopefully the world stays quiet and everybody gets a little bit of relaxation and downtime. Take care. We'll talk soon. Have a good one.